Recently, I've been getting a whole heap of flack on my channel complaining that I haven't done a review on Sonic the Hedgehog 3 yet. Unfortunately for me though, there wasn't a whole lot I could do about that, as for a lot of that time the film hadn't even come out in Australia yet. Now that it has, and I've been able to go to the theatre and see it, because it's not like I live in the cinema, I have a lot of thoughts, so you can stop complaining. First up, I have to say I'm super happy about the movie and just the franchise in general. Growing up through the 2000s and the early 2010s, the idea of a lucrative and successful as well as genuinely good video game film franchise was a ridiculous notion. Here we are though. The first Sonic film came out despite a lot of fear in the lead up. I mean, remember that original terrible design for Sonic? It ended up doing well. It had a decent gross of $320 million off about $90 million and got good reviews from everybody. 64% critical score, which is to be expected, and also a 93% audience score, which is also to be expected. These types of films often have a big difference in how they're perceived by the public and professional critics after all. Then we come to the second film, which did similar numbers with slight improvements. It grossed $405 million off of up to $110 million, whilst getting critical and audience scores of 69 and 96% respectively. Perhaps not as big of a hit as they would have liked for a sequel, but it's clear that the popularity of the franchise was on the rise, and I think it's only going to grow and grow as they continue to make more films. This latest one's already doing really well for itself. So far, it's grossed $212 million off of $122 million, which seems as though it might be set up to be the most successful film of the franchise yet. On top of that, this one's much more of a hit with critics with an 88% score, whilst the audience score remains as high as ever at 96%. It's definitely my favourite of the franchise, so this immediate success and the early accolades and admiration are well deserved in my eyes. There really is just so much to enjoy about this film, and I suppose we'd better go through it piece by piece. I know I say it in every review, but there's always newbies to the channel, so for those of you who don't know, I tend to break down movies into three major categories: visuals, audio, narrative. We can start with the visuals. God damn, these visuals were amazing. It felt like a step up from anything we'd seen in the franchise before. It always looked good, but here it was next level. The characters are of course one thing, being able to see the fuzz on the arms or the individual quills, and honestly it's something you should come to expect from these sorts of movies. Beyond that though, and honestly the biggest wow factor of the film itself, was the action. If you're making an adaptation of one of the most classic action games ever, you have to pull it off. They did so twice over already. Here, I feel like they needed to bring it up a notch. They had Tails, Knuckles, and Sonic versus Eggman, other Eggman, and Shadow. It had to go to a whole new place to fulfill those expectations, and I really think they delivered on that promise. I love that they stayed true to the franchise as well and didn't just have high-octane fights in the same location. Some of the film's best sequences felt ripped straight from the games, as long-running sequences, which were interspersed with fighting, key dialogue, and character building. Even if the story was bad, which hold your horses, I'm not saying it was, I'm saying if theoretically the story was bad, this film would have been worth it for the action alone. But there's so much more that pushes it towards perhaps being the best video game adaptation of all time. In terms of the music, I'll admit I'm a filthy casual when it comes to Sonic, so I have no idea if there were nostalgic or important themes woven into the score. I also don't really remember much of the soundtrack at all, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, except for the Robotnik dance. That was definitely a standout, but for the most part it just completely slipped out of my mind, especially with everything that was going on in the film. For me, a score really shines when there's longer moments of reflection in a movie, but Sonic's high octane, as it should be. So it never really gives it time to sink in. I don't think that's a problem though, because like I said, there's so much more to enjoy. I felt like the actual acting performances were off the charts here. For starters, Ben Schwartz as Sonic. He's always been good, but I think this film took him up to a whole new level for me. He kept that innocent and naive / goofy persona, but took it up a notch with some added angst and rage. His portrayal had a lot of depth in this movie, and obviously part of that is due to the writing, but his acting rose to meet the occasion too. Really, all of the voice performances were great. Idris Elba, when he was first cast years ago, I will admit I was not convinced. Here though, and in the Knuckles show from earlier this year, he's really shone. Same with Keanu. Dude can be wooden. I think that's fair enough to say about his acting. I don't think he's going to hit all those same highs as some other actors might. But that's not what you cast him for. When you need a brooding, badass type character, who does it better? Very few, that's who. He captured a really nuanced portrayal of Shadow and brought the character to life. The human actors were good too, specifically the guy that plays Stone. My god, he is one of the best characters in the whole franchise. It's like a live-action Mr. Smithers, and it works just as well, largely thanks to the actor. Oh yes, and there's also just Jim Carrey pulling out a generational performance in this movie as Dr. Eggman and Gerald Robotnik. On the one hand, you have the unhinged side of things, going full late 90s, early 2000s Jim Carrey with standard Ivor Robotnik portrayals. He felt very Grinch-esque at times. I loved how in every film you can see he gets ever so slightly more Jim Carrey-esque. more over the top and ridiculous in his persona. For a comedy character as well, he actually had a lot of depth, and you could see that inner turmoil playing out through his performance. Even if every scene he's in, he is intentionally ridiculous. Then, he was even able to pull off a completely different character who retains some of that wacko vibe, and who looks very similar, but who has this undercurrent of bitterness and cruelty in a way that Eggman just doesn't. I was really impressed that he was able to make this ridiculous old villain who, by all rights, should be kooky and goofy, have this really dark and serious side. Sometimes you do forget that Jim Carrey is a really talented actor with a whole lot of range. The rest of the human character portrayals were good, nothing to write home about really, not bad or anything, no hate to them, but the films stand out with those that I just mentioned, and I think that's very clear. So then that brings us to the story. Sonic 3 picks up sometime after both the second film and the Knuckles show, with our three colourful heroes living out lives of domestic bliss in Green Hills, celebrating the anniversary of Sonic's arrival on Earth. At the same time, a hedgehog named Shadow, who came to Earth 50 years prior and who after the death of his favourite human Maria was placed into suspended animation, is woken up by Dr. Eggman's grandfather Gerald, who is also the grandfather of Maria, Shadow's aforementioned favourite human. Shadow whoops significant ass and Gun summons Team Sonic in fear, as there's nobody else who can stop him. In Tokyo, the three are pretty easily defeated by Shadow, and then when regrouping with Gun Commander Walters, they're attacked by Eggman drones, which kills Walters and threatens them, before they're rescued by Eggman's sidekick Stone. The trio then meet Eggman and the five form an alliance to discover who's using Robotnik's stolen tech. This leads them to track down Shadow and Gerald, with Shadow once again defeating the trio, and Eggman defecting to join his newly discovered grandfather, in his and Shadow's quest to supposedly destroy Gun headquarters as revenge for Maria's death. Sonic and the team, as well as Tom and Maddie, infiltrate HQ, and a three-way battle for the keycard that controls the weapon begins, which leaves Tom in a critical condition at the hands of Shadow, with Shadow once again being the true victor of the fight. Sonic enters his rage mode and goes to find the Master Emerald, and uses it to fight Shadow, who also powers up using the Emerald. Sonic finally gets his victory, and then spares his life when he realizes that he's also becoming consumed with revenge. The two then bond and work together to stop Gerald, who revealed his plans to destroy the world, not just Gun headquarters, which caused Robotnik, his grandson, to turn on him too. Eggman, Knuckles and Tails kill Gerald in what was a pretty hilarious moment, and then they all work with Sonic and Shadow to save the world, before Robotnik and Shadow sacrifice themselves to ensure the explosion of the facility doesn't impact the Earth. They do accidentally destroy the moon, slightly though. Sonic reconciles with his friends, Tom recovers, and in two post-credit scenes we set up Metal Sonic, like I said, I'm a casual, and also Amy, whilst also revealing Shadow survived the explosion, because of course he did. You wouldn't kill him off after one film. Robotnik, he is probably dead though. Sonic can get away with having a pretty boring and by-the-numbers plot. At its core, we're dealing with an action movie, and so people are going to likely go and see it anyway, simply because of the explosions and the fights and whatnot. As long as it's good, it'll always retain a bit of an audience. Not here though. Here they went all out in making this an absolute top-tier story. There's really a lot to love about it. I really love Sonic's arc, which serves as a reflection of Shadow's, having this deep and rich bond with his family, but when he thinks Tom might die, he loses his mind and goes scorched earth against anybody, including Knuckles. At the very last second though, he remembers what Tom told him about staying true to your heart, and so he stops himself and by doing so saves the world. Meanwhile, this makes Shadow realize that he'd become the thing he was afraid of becoming, the evil alien from the film that he watched with Maria. I thought that was a nice touch, and I know it's cheesy, but the power of friendship winning over the power of hate and revenge? Hell yeah, sign me up for that. Where the film really triumphed narratively though was in the villains, in their arcs. Sonic's generally been a fairly light-hearted franchise. Yes, there are serious elements to it, but it never veered into characters and situations that felt this dark before. Not in an edgy way either, but just a more nuanced and mature perspective. Shadow and his whole story was just awesome in every single way, same with Gerald. Shadow on the surface is just this brooding, badass, evil Sonic. The classic dark reflection trope. It's not a character that usually has a lot of nuance or depth at all, but then the layers are peeled back and you see his desire to be better. How he was better with Maria and he didn't want to be the evil thing that everybody saw him as. How he regrets hurting Tom. He doesn't want to fight Sonic and the others at all. He has multiple chances to finish them off and yet he never bothers to do it. Then you have that big change of heart that doesn't feel rushed at the end, it feels earned. You see his heart start to change and begin to understand his dynamic with Maria. Meanwhile, there's Robotnik Sr. He starts off and you expect him to be a clone of Eggman really, a typical goofy over-the-top weirdo. But every so often you see a dark glimmer in his eye, something a bit more malevolent that indicates there's something off about him. Then that darkness is truly revealed when he pretty much outright tells Ivo that he doesn't love him, and he used him to help destroy the world as justice for Maria, the grandchild he actually liked. Even then though, I like that he wasn't some generic supervillain who wants to destroy the world for no reason. There's a layer of sympathy to his actions and behaviours that he's clearly been twisted by grief and rage. Definitely the best story out of the three so far, and also the funniest. Maybe it was just letting Jim Carrey act entire scenes out by himself, or they just improved the scripts over time, but this was the biggest step up for me. There were so many good jokes and quips, and overall, it was just a whole lot of fun. I didn't love the second film of the franchise, I'll be honest with you, and I was really hoping that I would like this one because I didn't want the same negative backlash like I did before. Because I'll be genuine, even if it causes severe flaming, I just wasn't a fan. But the Knuckles TV show and this movie turned me around a whole bunch. I'm really looking forward to the next installment. With all that being said though, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of Sonic 3, if you've seen it? Did you like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and let me know.